Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Many of you likely have a compass on your device, but you probably don't use it much because technology has advanced a little bit and we have these fancy global positioning systems that can tell us precise directions and read them out to us as we're driving along, and even tell us that there's an object that's been reported in the road and the store that you're going to might be closing. But before then, we had to use other means of directions. Now, maps have been around for quite some time. There have been times when individuals would find a direction by even using the stars. And then you have the compass that was developed, and following the stars, by the way, and the maps that have been able to be drawn, and the compass that has been able to be developed, are all testaments to God's design and the order and the organization that he has placed within the universe. It is the case that at times an analog compass could be interfered with if it was brought near some other magnetic field or some other form of magnet that might attract the needle that was within the compass and cause it to be disturbed and not give you proper directions. In modern day, apparently a lot of our electronics can cause interference with the magnet of an analog compass, and perhaps some other things, extreme conditions. If you have a compass that maybe was fluid filled and you're in such extreme conditions that the fluid could not move properly, then your compass might be affected. But as we think about our morality, as we think about what we see as right and what we see as wrong, and the path that we choose, where do we find the compass, the direction for that? The Proverbs writer, Solomon here, writing to his son, would exhort his son and leave for us, by inspiration of the Spirit, a timeless truth that we need to trust in the Lord with all of our heart, and lean not to our own understanding. In all our ways acknowledge him, and he will direct our paths. We need to look to him for direction. Lean not to our own understanding. Now, there's some irony, because just last night, leaving Paris, Tennessee, backing up a little bit, when David Golich and I were both single young men preachers, and he was preaching at Whitlock, and I was down here at Coldwater, oftentimes we would travel to and fro to see one another and hang out with one another. And so I knew the area very well. I've actually never been to the Eastwood congregation where we were, but I knew the area very well. And so I knew that I didn't need to get out my GPS to go back home. I knew how to go. And we left Eastwood, and I didn't make the immediate turn that needed to be made. And I drove about 30 minutes toward Kentucky before realizing, wait a minute, we're not going the right way. So I had to turn around and come all the way back and then get on the right path. So who do we trust for our directions? Where do we find the directions for our lives? And there's 4 concepts that we're going to take from Proverbs 3, 1 through 12 this afternoon. The first one being the concept of truth that we're going to see in the text. And then we're going to see here in a moment the concept of trust, and then treasure, and then trial. And I'll bring those up as we get there. But first, let us think about truth. When you go to Proverbs 3, beginning with verse 1, he says, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man." And so he focuses upon the truths that he's going to give to his son. I'm going to leave you with these guidelines. I'm going to leave you with these laws. I'm going to leave you with these commandments. Don't forget them. Don't leave them. Take them with you. Make sure that they are with you everywhere that you go. And in verse 3, he emphasizes, let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Never leave those behind. Interestingly, the word that is translated mercy there, the ASV has kindness, the ESV has steadfast love. It is a word that we find many times throughout the Old Testament that sometimes is translated as loving kindness and mercy. Kyle and DeLeach, in their commentary on the Old Testament, indicate that this word is very akin to our New Testament word in the Greek agape, that sacrificial love that God has displayed to us and shown to us and given to us. And so mercy here is very much tied with that love. And if you consider 1 Corinthians 13 for just a moment, I invite you to go over there with me for just a moment and be reminded of that agape love that Paul so beautifully describes and illustrates for us and defines for us. And as you read through here, you won't find the word mercy. But what you will find is the very heart and attitude of one who is merciful, because this person contains this agape sacrificial love. Charity or love suffers long. It is kind. Charity or love envies not. It does not vaunt itself. It does not puff up itself. It does not build up itself or parade itself. It is not puffed up. And so it's not inwardly prideful and it's not outwardly prideful. It does not behave itself unseemly. It seeks not its own. It's not selfish. And it is not easily provoked. And it does not think evil. And therein is the idea of not taking account of the wrong that has been done to me, because I'm going to have mercy. I'm going to have love. It does not rejoice in iniquity. Remember, our point here is truth. And the Proverbs writer says, let mercy and truth not forsake thee, or let love and truth not forsake you, or you do not forsake these things. You never leave these things behind. And so he has connected together the concept of love and truth, or mercy and truth. He has connected them together. And when you really consider what God has shown to us, they are inseparable. Godly love, sacrificial love, and truth that God has given us are inseparable. And so in Ephesians 4 and verse 15, you have where Paul would say, teach the truth, speaking the truth in love. And so here he says, love does not rejoice in iniquity, but it rejoices in truth. It does not rejoice in sin. Unfortunately, the world says that we rejoice in things that God calls sin, and we are going to call them love. And that's different than what God says. That's lust, that's not love. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Love never fails, he says. But going back to Proverbs now, under this concept of truth, and seeing that the word mercy here is akin to love and connected to truth, let us consider how he says to never leave them behind. And he's going to use two illustrations to describe that. And that's what the other passages that are here relate to these two illustrations. The first, he says to bind them about your neck. Now, this is a practice that goes back, and we somewhat still follow this practice even today. But if you were to consider in Genesis 38 and verse 18, unfortunately in a very immoral context, you have there Judah that is giving a pledge to Tamar, and he gives her, and she demands the signet and the cord, and then which would have been about his neck, that he would have wore around his neck, and also the staff that was in his hand. Well, today we travel around with a license, oftentimes, or some other form of personal identification, so that others can know who we are. And that day and time, they would travel around with a signet. Sometimes it was a ring. Sometimes it was worn upon what we might call a necklace. And that would be an identifier for them, that it was unique to that person. And oftentimes, if it was used to send a message, then someone would use that and place an impression upon the clay seal on a scroll. to say, this letter is from me, and I have sealed it, and no one else is going to open it until it reaches its recipient. And so the Proverbs writer Solomon says, bind mercy and truth, or love and truth, around your neck. Wear them around your neck. In modern day, we might have a very special charm that we wear around our neck, and we never leave home without it. He says, love and truth, never leave home without them. Bind them around your neck. And then he uses the illustration of writing upon a tablet, the table of your heart. In 2 Corinthians 3, verses 2 and 3, Paul, there writing to the church at Corinth, says, you are our epistle, or our letter, written in our hearts, known and read of all men, for as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in fleshly tables, or human tables of the heart. And so he says, love and truth, wear them around your neck, write them upon the tablets of your heart, deeply impressed, and do not leave them behind. And so if we want to know what is right and wrong, and we want to choose what is right and avoid that which is wrong, we first have to look to the truth that God has revealed to us. Certainly his word is truth, John 17 and verse 17. And we go to and look to his word to know how we ought to go. But also we've got to continue to trust in the direction that God has given us. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel, and marrow to thy bones. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart. Who do you trust, or what do you trust to direct your paths that you choose, to direct your emotions that you have, to direct the mindset that you have, and how you respond to the things that we face in this life? Who do you trust to guide you in those things? Many times individuals will trust merely a friend, or a teacher, or some other authority figure. Many times individuals go to media outlets as their authority for what they're to trust, and how they are to respond, and how they are to act and live, and things that they are to say. We need to place our trust primarily and entirely in the Lord, Jehovah God, and his word. Many years ago when I was in college, we had a circle of friends that had kind of been separated by life. A couple of them had moved up to Kentucky because their parents moved up there. One of our friends went off to Freed-Hardeman, and then we had one newer friend who was kind of in the circle, but he was still new, but he was there with me in the Athens-Monroe area at the time. And we were going to convene at Freed-Hardeman for a weekend event they were having, and to gather back together as friends and see our friend who was at Freed-Hardeman. And my friend here, who was back in college with me, he had gotten himself into a situation where he had no money. And he told me, he said, I can't go. He's like, I can't contribute to gas. I can't contribute to the hotel. I can't go. I said, you're going. You're going. I said, I want you to go. I'll take care of the financial side of things. I'll take care of our room. I'll take care of the gas, and I'll drive. I said, I want you to go. I want the companionship. At that time, it was the longest trip I would have driven, I believe. And I wanted the companionship. And I wanted him to go and to see friends that he knew as well. And he said, okay, I want to do something. He said, so let me navigate at least. So I said, okay. I trusted him to navigate. Now, at that time, we didn't have the fancy global positioning system. Now, they were out. I'm sure some had the GPS, the TomToms that you could put in your car. But we would have to go onto the internet and wait on it to dial up a little bit maybe. And we would print out instructions based upon the maps that were in there. And so he had the instructions printed out. He said, man, I'm excited. I've found a route to missed the Atlanta traffic and other things. I found us a good route. So we drove, and we drove, and we drove. We're coming from the Athens, Georgia area, going up to Tennessee. From my vantage point, that's probably opposite for you. And we should have gone into Alabama and on up into Tennessee, and that would have been the quicker route. And we drive 4 or 5 hours, and we're just now in part of Tennessee over toward Nashville, Knoxville area, more toward Knoxville, I believe. And I said, "Where are you taking me?" And so we stop at a convenience store. We're going to look at a regular old map, and the convenience store owner said, "No, you got to pay for that to be able to look at it." So we start driving. We drove, I think, almost the whole length of Tennessee, it seemed like, to get over to Freed Hardeman. And I said, "I'm never trusting you again for navigation." Now, I trust him. He's a very good friend of mine. I trust him in many other ways, but he's not going to be my navigator. Who do we trust to be our navigator in life? And especially as it pertains to what is right and wrong, it needs to be in Jehovah, who has shown us what is right and who is the definer of good and the definer of what is right. In Psalm 37, 3-5, "Trust in the Lord and do good. So shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass." And then in Jeremiah 9, in verse 23, I reference Jeremiah 10:23 quite often. Jeremiah 10:23 is very applicable here. "O Lord, I know that the way of man is not within himself. It is not within man to direct his own steps." That is, we don't know how to go without looking to God. We don't truly know who we are, why we're here, where we're going, if we don't look to what God has revealed to us. But notice what Jeremiah 9:23 says, and then into verse 24. "Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory or boast or trust in his wisdom. Neither let the mighty man glory or boast or trust in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches." Many times people trust in their own wealth, or whether they have it or not. "But let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness." That's our same word, by the way, in the Hebrew, as mercy, back that we were considering a few moments ago. Loving kindness here. "Judgment and righteousness in the earth, for in these things I delight, saith the Lord." So what do we look to guide us, to direct us, our moral compass? We need to look to God's truth. We need to trust in him, and we need to have treasure in those things that he shows us to have treasure in, to have placed the most value upon the things that he places value. Here in Proverbs 3:9-10, "Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine." He says, if you will use everything monetarily and materially in this world that you have at your disposal to ultimately bring honor and glory to God, that's your foremost purpose. That your purpose is not to glorify yourself. Your purpose is not to satisfy yourself. Your purpose is to glorify God. He's going to bless you, and you're going to have an abundance. Now, in the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 6, God does not promise us necessarily an abundance. There in Matthew 6, verses 20 on up to verses 34, you have there the exhortation to not worry about the things that we need, because God's going to provide those if we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And there in Matthew 6, verses 19-21, he says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." And you have the words of Paul to Timothy as he would tell Timothy, and formerly in that same chapter, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, you can read some other things that Paul would teach Timothy to understand that godliness with great gain, or godliness with contentment, is great gain. Whereas the world thinks that great gain is what will make them be content or will be godliness. That's not what he says. He says, no, godliness with contentment is great gain. He exhorts him to not love uh, money, because that is the root of all kinds of evil. And then he goes on to say, charge them that are rich in this world. This is verses 17 through 19 of 1 Timothy 6. Charge them that are rich in this world that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, that is, being generous and using the things that we have to help others who are in need, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. You know, that analog compass that sometimes has magnetic interference from some other magnetic field, or is drawn by some electronic device or other things. It's very illustrative of oftentimes it is the case that the riches of this world draw us off the path that we once were on, pull us away from the direction that God has given us. He says, make sure you use those things for His glory and see them just as tools, that they're not goals. Those are tools, not goals. And so we come also to trial, which is illustrative from the compass as well. When the compass is found in extreme conditions, it may malfunction. Sometimes when we suffer and when we're persecuted, we're tempted to leave the direction that we once followed. We're tempted to think that God has caused this to happen to us, or to be bitter toward God, when rather it is that time that we need to cling to Him the most and trust in Him and seek to glorify Him and ultimately give Him glory for whether good or bad comes our way. Here he says in verses 11 and 12, my son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of His correction. For whom the Lord loveth, He correcteth, even as a father the son in whom He delighteth. We find these words again in Hebrews 12, verses 5 and 6. Within the context now of Hebrews, the Hebrews writers writing to Christians who wanted to leave the church and go back to following the law of Moses, because that was what they were more comfortable with. That would mean that they would be less persecuted in that day and time, many of them suffering persecution because they had chosen to follow Christ. And so he says to them, have you forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children? My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, He chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom He receiveth. Now, a great deal of suffering that happens to us is not God causing something to happen to us. However, it is at that time we can remember He loves us. And we can remember that whatever is happening to us, hopefully will direct us back to Him and guide us back to Him and guide us to Him in every form or fashion. Recently, in our Zoom class that we had while we were iced in, snowed in, following the class as we studied from Job a little bit, Suzanne posted a quote from C.S. Lewis, who has worded something that many have seen before, and that is, it is logically impossible for us to live in this life and expect to not suffer in some way. Many think that God should just wipe it all away here in this life, that He should take away all the pain and suffering and In fact, when we do that, we put ourselves in the position of God. We make ourselves God when we think that he should do things differently. But C.S. Lewis says this, quote, try to exclude the possibility of suffering which the order of nature and the existence of free wills involve. So suffering comes about because we live in a world that has the natural order that it has, the laws that God has put in place, and there's free will in this life. We have the ability to choose. And you find, he says, that you have excluded life itself. And so if you take away, it's the idea that the phrase that we sometimes say, someone wants their cake and to be able to eat it too. You can't have your cake and eat it also. If you have a piece of cake, you cannot continue to have it in your possession if you eat it. It will no longer be there. It will be inside of you. Therein it is logically impossible to live in this life and to have free will, the ability to choose, and not have the suffering that is here, unless every person chose sinlessly, and we know from the very beginning that is not the case. And so when we have trial, where are we going to direct it? Where are we going to be directed? What path are we going to choose when we experience the trials in this life, the persecutions, the sufferings that come our way? James says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations or trials, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect or complete and entire, lacking nothing. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. As we think about our moral compass, how we view what is right and understand what is wrong, and strive for those things that are right and avoid those things that are wrong, then we need to look to the one who made the magnetic field. We need to look to the one who placed the order in the universe. We need to look to the one who has the truth that we need, in whom all our trust should be, and treasure what he has shown us to treasure, and look to him in the midst of every trial. And that's going to help us, that we continue to go back to his word, continue to go back to the way that he has shown us. Maybe it's the case this afternoon that you've not been following that way. Maybe you've lost your way. You once followed him, but you have turned away from him. If you're ready to give your life to Christ, believing who he is, and with that faith, repenting of your former life of sin, and confessing your faith in him and being baptized into Christ, we could help you with those things. Or maybe you need to study further to understand what the way of God is. We would love to help you with that. Or maybe you've done all of these, you've become a Christian, but you've left the path that God has shown you, and you need to come back to him. You have that opportunity as well. If you need to come to the Lord or come back to him, won't you come?